Okay. People need help with this. Every apostate, church loving Christian, and I've done a video before on Jesus is my Sabbath, and I touched on this, I believe, but not in I'm doing it again, right? Because everyone says Jesus is my Sabbath, and they just quote Hebrews 4, and they go, see, he's the rest. Jesus is my Sabbath rest. And the little passage they quote here is, I mean, they usually will just give you the whole chapter because it's a short chapter, but they say, they're looking here at verse 8 onwards. For if Jesus had given them, if Yeshua, that's his name, that's his real name, he comes in his Father's name, Yah saves, read Acts 4:12. If Yeshua had given them rest, then would he not afterward have spoken of another day? There remaineth therefore a rest to the people of God. For he that entered into his rest, he also hath ceased from his own work, as God did from his. They probably use the next verse as well. Let us labour therefore to enter into the rest, lest any man fall after the same example of unbelief. That this juncture here is what they'll quote. Now, I've got Hebrews 3 up on the same screen, for a reason here. So look, when a chapter starts with moreover, or therefore, or let us therefore, that's a clue to go back to the previous chapter and see what it was talking about, if you haven't already. If you're studying something out and someone says, go and read chapter da-da-da of da-da-da, and it starts with let us therefore, don't be an idiot. Go back and read what is the therefore. Right? There was no chapter breaks in the original scrolls. These have been added, and I wouldn't mind saying that some of these have been added in very, suspicious or malevolent places, right? It's no coincidence. So anyway, what's the rest? Let's just go back one simple chapter and we'll see. So where should I start? Harden not your hearts as in the provocation in the day of temptation in the wilderness, when your fathers tempted me, proved me, and saw my works 40 years. What happened for 40 years in the wilderness? Oh yeah, that was when Israel were wandering around waiting to enter the promised land. Wherefore I was grieved with that generation and said, they do err in their heart, and they have not known my ways. So I swear in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest. That's your rest. The rest is the land. The rest isn't not keeping the Sabbath. It's absolutely twisted and perverted. It's a huge lie. It's a huge lie. And I'll just skip down a bit. But with whom was he grieved 40 years? Was it not with them that had sinned, whose carcasses fell in the wilderness? And to whom sware he that they should not enter into his rest, but to them that believe not? So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. There's your rest. It's got nothing to do with the Sabbath. Okay, read the previous chapter. Don't be an idiot. And here's the thing: you can't. You'll read that now, and your disobedient, prideful heart will even try to wrangle with this still and say, no, the rest in chapter 4 is different. It's talking about the Sabbath because of this and that, da-da-da. You can't redefine Scripture. Let Scripture define Scripture. If you can redefine Scripture, if what God has defined, you can go ahead in the very next chapter, let alone, least of all, redefine a concept or a word. Throw the whole Bible out. It's the same thing when Yeshua said, when he elevated 2 commandments, love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbour as yourself. The second is like unto it, love your neighbour as yourself. These weren't new commandments. He's quoting the Old Testament, but you don't read the Old Testament, so how do you, which was the only scripture at the time, so how do you ever think you're going to understand what the Messiah was saying? How do you ever think you're going to understand what Paul was saying? Peter tells you wrestle with Paul because you're unlearned. Because you don't read the entire book. You start from the back of the book. You can't redefine something. So when Messiah says loving your neighbour is, and he's quoting Leviticus 19:17 and 18, go and see what he's quoting. Go see what it means to love your neighbour. Oh, it means to rebuke their sin. That makes a lot of sense because you don't want to see them go to hell. What's the rest? Oh, okay, it's when you're in the land. Nothing to do with the Sabbath. Okay, I won't be so presumptuous next time. But you won't say that because you're full of pride and you don't have ears to hear. And you love to regurgitate things that your apostate teachers, the same ones that are doing Christmas and Easter, pagan witchcraft in the church. You love to regurgitate what they've told you because they're so trustworthy, right? Stop saying these lies. Okay, that's all. Bye.